All right, folks, welcome back. And this is part two of Mars, Atlantis, and the Hollow Earth. So let's go back to the beginning here. Just making sure it's the most up-to-date presentation because I had a couple of spelling errors on the last one. It's irritating when you go through the presentations and you notice all these grammar errors or spelling errors, and you're like 13 slides in, and you're like, God damn it, I need to do this whole thing again, don't I? So anyway, just making sure that that's the most up-to-date, error-free presentation. I'm sure there's one or two errors I've probably missed, but let's just crack on with it. So disclaimer, copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing, blah, blah, blah. So we're going back to Brinsley-Lapoire Trench with the Temple of the Stars, sites of antiquity. Many people have had various ideas about the Great Pyramid at Giza, Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain, and that remote mysterious island called Easter. A goodly number of these people have written books. Impressed with the implications of it all, they have put pen to paper on such subjects as the lost continent of Atlantis, the sun worshippers. There is a connection between such widely separated accomplishments as the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge. It is an Egyptian antiquity. All over the world are to be found the same things, the same pattern. This extraordinary sun worshipping civilization with its pyramids, dolmens, and stone circles, its mining activities and fondness for gold, its elaborate irrigation systems for food production. Immigrants from the West. It is a remarkable fact that all the ancient peoples of North, South, and Central America state that they are descended from people who came from the East, whereas all the evidence only too clearly indicates that people were descended from immigrants who came from the West. The central point. The evidence indicates that people went forth from a central focal point in all directions across the world, seeking new places where there were minerals to establish their own civilization. What and where was that central point, that parent source of civilization? The Atlanteans. There is evidence pointing to the Atlantic Ocean and the British Isles as the home base from which the Phoenicians, the Celts, and others went forth to show the world how to sail ships, to produce food, to make beer, to mine minerals, to erect pyramids and other cyclopean buildings. 3 stages of disaster. These, I submit, were the Atlanteans who colonized the world. Furthermore, the British people, together with their American descendants, are of Atlantean extraction. Atlantis went down beneath the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, probably in 3 main stages. However, the British Isles remain. The height of Atlantis. Occult tradition infers that the Atlanteans had probably reached a very high degree of technological achievement prior to 25,000 BC. Undoubtedly, they had spaceships and were in communication with other planets. Their civilization gradually grew more materialistic. Atlantean scientists were playing with forces capable of the most terrible destructive potential, even more so than nuclear ones. The fall of Atlantis. They started a full-scale war and unleashed a chain reaction of lethal power far beyond their control. This holocaust resulted in seismic disturbances that ended in the destruction of the greater Atlantis. Huge tidal waves swept the world, land masses shifted, large portions of the population perished. The Great Catastrophe. The builders of Tiahuanaco and the people who constructed the giant figures on Easter Island may both have been colonists from Atlantis. The Great Catastrophe that occurred about 13,000 BC was one that encompassed most of the world, and the inhabitants of both places may have perished at the same time. Psychology of the survivors. The population of the world after this series of catastrophes was very small. Those that were left had been driven almost insane and reduced to a state little more than terrified animals. They never knew when another violent paroxysm of the Earth might occur, causing hot lava to erupt out of cavities, tidal waves to overwhelm them, or earthquakes to swallow them up. Hunter gatherers. Most of the survivors, because of the state of their minds, wandered about the earth seeking their food wherever it could be found. People were unable to keep any system of agriculture going due to the centuries of unpredictable weather conditions. Agriculture was completely lost. They were reduced to a wandering hunting and fishing state. Survival of the British Isles. One part of Atlantis had not gone under. The lands now known as the British Isles, the Fortunate Isles, remained high and dry, and it was from there that the world once more to receive civilization. Atlantis may have been an empire worldwide, but Poseid was an island. Island of Poseid. When people say Atlantis, they usually mean Poseid, which is said to have sunk about 9,564 BC. Northward, there was another piece of the old Atlantean Empire. There were many small islands in the group, one large one, Ireland, and a peninsula thrusting out from the European mainland, shaped something like a boot. It's pretty interesting how the Irish and Italian flags are so similar. I've always been interested in the connections between the Irish and the Italians, and I'm sure there are connections there to be made, but that's subject for another time. An animal like existence. However, Britain, although it had its tribulations and disturbances, remained above water. Poseid went down about 9,500 BC, and it is fairly certain that for at least 4,000 years after that, life was almost unbearably hectic. The inhabitants were forced by circumstances to eke out an animal-like existence. The Sky People. However, memories of the motherland, Atlantis, were ingrained in their minds, and it was to Britain and its survivors that the Sky People first came back. After the long and gradual dissolution of the Atlantean Empire, following the period of upheaval and destruction, the final sinking of Poseid removed the last vestiges of civilization from the earth. The Age of Leo. Isolated communities has managed somehow to survive, like those in South America and in the Himalayan region, were finally overwhelmed by the chaos that had overtaken mankind. Using the astrological cycles for a guide and correlating them with the Egyptian cycles, we find the date given by Plato for the destruction of Poseid to be accurately placed in the period of decline of the age of Leo the lion, the dispersal of humanity. The great zodiacal age of the lion lasted from a little before 11,000 BC until around 9,000 BC. The destruction of Poseid, according to Plato, took place during the later part of this period. The closing centuries of this age, which are usually occupied with the renaissance of thought and discovery that marks the time of gestation of the coming new age, saw the dispersal of humanity and the migration of Atlantean mankind. Out of this concept grew the practice of surrounding a special place with water, thus creating a sacred island. It was only comparatively late in the history of this idea that the moat as a part of a system of defense came into being. Before that, it was a representation of the sea that surrounded the sacred place. The temple pool. Also came the other idea of a temple pool, usually with a little island in the middle or statue or a fountain. Either way, it was all done in memory of one, the Isles of the Dead, Poseidon and the Atlantean Empire, and two, the Isles of the Blessed, sacred to the dead and to the living. Creation of the gods. Everything about the pyramid staggers the imagination. It is the creation of the gods. The origins of the zodiac probably goes back to 13,000 BC. It must have been conceived in some fairly cloudless country near the latitude of 25 degrees north of the equator. The Virgin and the Lion. Egypt was a colony of Atlantis. The Great Pyramid has been thought to be a part of our Atlantean heritage. Why not the Sphinx as well? Is the Sphinx a symbolic monument to both Atlantis and to the science of the stars? This Sphinx, this monument, in symbol to the astrologers of ancient Atlantis, tells us that what began with a virgin ended with a lion. The Mid Atlantic Ridge. Let us begin by considering Egypt, the British Isles, and Poseid as the parts of one whole of the vanished Atlantean Empire. References, books even abound to state and to support this thesis. At a point in the Atlantic Ocean on the mid-Atlantic ridge that rather more than roughly corresponds to the most usually agreed upon location of Poseid, that last remnant of the old Atlantean continent. The concept of duality. But why do we double the pyramid? Because of the concept of that certain duality that runs through the whole history of mankind from Atlantis. It discovers itself continually as we examine tradition, myth, symbol, and even recorded history, however distorted. From the north. In modern times, we associate Poseidon with the sea. The Greeks came down from the north, bringing with them the lord Dan or Dawn. He was assimilated by other peoples who had taken to the sea. However, questions come to mind in connection with all this, if one is interested in the myths and stories about Atlantis. So that about wraps it up for part 2. Join us for part 3 and leave your thoughts and comments below. Part 2 even. So part 3 is coming up, or part 3, how do you say it? 3, Reglesen. Remember that? From, what was it? Inglorious Bastards. He gave himself away because he ordered 3 glasses, But anyway, part 3 is still coming up, and that'll wrap things up. So hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I can't talk today. Hope you've enjoyed the presentation so far, and have a lovely day. Cheers.